So Brian and I, funny enough, we had just opened up this store, which was the third or the fourth store. I don't remember. It was maybe the third store up in Plano. And, I called him one day because we were having some arguments with the head guy at the franchise, because he was really upset about us carrying a pre-workout supplement from another company, because they really wanted you to sell their stuff. Right. So I called him, and he and I had a couple arguments, the CEO of NutriShop. And, I called Brian one day and I was like, fuck this. We're going to do our own thing. And he's like, well, what do you mean by that? And we're like, we're taking down that fucking sign, and we're going to come up with our own name, and we're going to reach out to manufacturers. We're going to make our own stuff, and we're going to do this ourselves. And he was like, he had just got his sign up. We had just stocked the store. He and I,
he's like, okay, boss.
So, I mean, and he had called a couple people to get advice. And what's funny is the same guy who had backed out of that first store with me said, oh no, you don't want to do that, And Brian got to thinking and just said, all right, let's do it. And, I came up there and we put all the shit on pallets. We shipped it back to the franchise. We covered up the sign, I believe, with like a fucking banner.
A banner of a new logo we created.
I go to Alpha Graphics,
and that was the test one. So he, a few weeks in was like, he just invested all of his money, and
Marver.
Yeah. He got a loan from his parents. Everything we had was into this thing, and we literally shipped back all these supplements and said, we're doing this ourselves. And so his store, the one that we had partnered on, was kind of that first test store that we did that on. And later on, a few months later, I converted my Austin stores and we started doing our own thing. But that was the first iteration. It was called Total Nutrition.
Okay. Yep. And I think it was Total Nutrition when you and I met.
Okay.
That's
right.
I remember that's what it was.
Yeah. So, and we I mean, you look back and there's just so many, in order to get to a certain point, there's mistakes everywhere. Right. And so, we made a big mistake. We partnered with a manufacturer out of New York, and we were young, and these guys said, oh yeah, we know how to franchise. We can make all your supplements, and, we'll do this thing together. And of course, Brian and I at the time were in non-competes. And so we're like, oh, we don't want our names on the documents, and these guys came.
Let's bring Cody in.
And that's a whole nother story, but that was the first iteration of us kind of saying we wanted to do this thing ourselves. And we sort of went into the franchise model at that time.
Well, and I regress because I should have pointed it out at the beginning of the show, because I want our guests to understand, where y'all are now, because we started, right from, as you mentioned, grassroots movement here, but y'all have north of 60 stores, maybe close to 65 stores, gross revenues at or near or above 50 million a year, EBITDA plus or minus 10 million, so you guys are truly crushing it with your model. And that's some of the things I want to talk about today for the young up and comers who maybe have similar aspirations as what y'all had at 23, 24, but clearly you had an entrepreneurial spirit. And Cody, I want to hear about yours as well, but just one that comes to mind, because you mentioned that, Brian had to borrow some money from his parents. Brian, you come from an entrepreneurial family. Your father had a, what was it? Halloween Spirit. I'm trying to remember the name of his company that he had.
Yeah. Spirit Halloween.
Spirit Halloween. And
so he was
they sold what to Spencer?
Entrepreneur.
Is that right? Spencer?
Yeah, he sold to Spencer, over 20 years ago now.
How many locations did they have before they sold?
I think it's a good question. I want to say it was in the probably the 50 to 60 range, with at least half of those being like quasi franchise. They called them consignment, but it was more or less like a license where he had friends and family and people that would, pay a license fee, and then they would buy the inventory from him and use the name and everything. So it wasn't exactly a franchise, but they were buying the stuff wholesale. So yeah.
Was
more amount of units, I think, as we do.
How old were you at the time? Were you like 15 or 12, or how old were you? What year were you born?
20 years ago. Yeah. I mean, let's just say it was 20 years ago. So I would have been, I guess 12, but I think I was probably more like 15. Yeah, it was probably more like 14, 13 or 14.
I just put you on the spot. Your fiance, when she watches this, she's going to be, wait, you said you were 32, dude. And she's going to do the math, and we're soon going to find out. But the reason for me why that's relevant is, your parents had that business since you can remember as a kid. It builds up. They have that 50 to 60, locations. And what was what was your experience as a kid growing up and seeing that, seeing your parents as entrepreneurs? Did you envision that you would do something similar as you grew up and started your
Uh,
business world?
I think it'd be easy to say absolutely sure, like that was my plan. But I think, growing up, my dad worked all the time. My parents got divorced when I was young, so my mom she was part of the business initially, and then when they got divorced, he kept the business, and I split time with my parents or whatever. So I worked the first job I ever had when I was 14. I worked in spirit stores. I set spirit stores up over summers, like working 3 in the morning to noon and working like a graveyard. And so I spent time in the business, but I think having parents that were entrepreneurs probably, if anything, it just seemed more normal than
Mm-hmm.
maybe the average person. So as I'm going through college or whatever, and I don't know what I want to do, but the prospect of like having my own business seemed very reasonable
Mm-hmm.
and normal. And I think for a lot of people that don't grow up that way, it's probably a lot more of a stretch, or they
Yep.
consider all the statistics about failure and, blah, blah, blah. And like, to me, that wasn't even really a thing. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to have my own business. Just don't know what it is or how. I
Well, you
wasn't
make a good
particularly
point.
worried about it until
You
it
pardon me.
presented itself.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
didn't mean to step on your words. That's probably the delay that we have here, but the I would say that you take the mindset of maybe, and we see it all the time, right? We have buddies who their dad or their mom was an attorney or is an attorney. Now they're an attorney, or they were a physician or a surgeon, and there's just a lineage of that, right? And I think you see something similar with those that have it in their blood, the entrepreneurial spirit, like what we're talking about with you, Brian. Would you agree with that?
I would. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it's nature or nurture, but it's certainly one of those two.
Mm-hmm. Was that
Probably a little bit of both.
was that the setup where they would go into like vacant shopping centers and set up the shop for the Halloween and set it up a couple months in
Yeah.
advance? And I always wondered, so I'm glad we're talking about this. Would y'all get like a sweetheart of a deal on the lease because you're like, hey, we're only going to have it for 3 or 4 months at a time?
I mean, I think the answer is that they were paying top dollar for that period.
Yeah.
So, if a landlord's like, oh, I can take, 3 or 4 months of cash real quick before I drop in this long-term tenant. And
Mm-hmm.
I think when you think of the cycle of business and retail, you just always had these big boxes that were going out of business
Mm-hmm.
in this cycle and presenting these good real estate opportunities in these big anchored centers. And, they were a tenant that could come in, didn't need any TI. They could take it as it was real quick. And so landlord could make a quick 50 or 100 grand.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle for them, of course, was how do you keep the same real estate year over year?
Yeah.
So you couldn't necessarily. So you're always, that was what the whole off season was spent doing,
Mm-hmm.
was finding real estate.
Well, why I think that's relevant and why I went off on that tangent is because, knowing you men for as long as I have and knowing how y'all are ruthless at negotiating your lease spaces. I mean, y'all are really, really savvy in that. And so that's why I wanted to drill down on that a little bit. Like, do you feel like that you learned some of those skills from that, or is it all
No.
straight from Charlie Hartwig?
It's all from Charlie Hartwig. I mean,
that
I
guy's
wasn't
ruthless, isn't he?
I didn't have proximity to that stuff. I was too young. So like, I didn't know what my dad was doing. I knew he owned Spirit. I knew he worked all the time. And then when I was in the store, I guess at 14, maybe the last couple of years he owned it, but I didn't know all the underpinnings and all the business workings of it.
Yeah.
I think it's coincidental, honestly.
Well, I'm just giving you more credit than you probably deserve is what that boils down to. What about you,
No,
Cody?
I learned my negotiating from Charlie. I'll admit that.
Charlie's the only one I know that comes to a podcast with brass knuckles. I'm not even sure why he did that, but to each their own. What about you, Cody? Where do you get that spirit from?
Really just watching these guys. Like I don't really view myself as that entrepreneurial type. But as I worked for these guys, I didn't own a store out of the gates. I started working for them and just observed them executing the playbook that they had put together. And over time, I had spent enough time observing it and got my opportunity to go open up my own store out in Tyler, Texas. Basically got their leftovers. They had to lease that.
Mm-hmm.
They had negotiated and didn't have the manpower, or took a couple other opportunities instead. And that was my segue into owning a store. And really just from there was watching them. And, I would make my little iterations on it, but I just stuck to the playbook. And I think that's like anybody, like what we do is not super special. It's really how you execute it. Because we could we say this sometimes, like we could give this playbook to anyone, but like if you can't execute it, it doesn't matter. So I just spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to execute it and iterate on it, and found some cool things that I was able to do and uncover because I didn't have to spend as much time as they did building the playbook. I would just iterate on it from there and, follow what they did. So
What do you think? What would you say your strong suit is now? I mean, I could give you my opinion on that, which, I think that you're fantastic at marketing your brand and believing in it. I know on social media, you're pretty hot and heavy on that, and that resonates, but where do you think, as president of 5-Star, what's your skill set that you're best suited at?
I kind of consider myself more of like an operator. Like these guys are the entrepreneurial spirit, big ideas, a lot of great ideas, a lot of ones that like eventually have to get passed off and executed on, right? And so that's where I feel like I kind of come in and added value to the entire organization, was, taking some ideas or taking what they had started and continuing the momentum and keeping that kind of steady hand and executing on it.